You're being taxed every single day, and you don't even realize it. Not through income tax, not through sales tax, through something far quieter, far stealthier, and far more destructive. A tax that never shows up on a payslip. A tax no politician ever admits exists. A tax that drains your savings, shrinks your paycheck, and steals your future in silence. This tax is inflation, the oldest financial trick in human history, a weapon empires have used for thousands of years. Inflation is the perfect thief. It eats your savings. It devalues your labor. It transfers wealth from people who earn money to people who print it, governments, banks, and the elites who understand the game. And here's the brutal truth. Inflation is not an accident. It's not a mistake. It's a choice, a deliberate tool, the easiest, quietest, most politically convenient tax ever invented. A way for governments to fund themselves without ever admitting they're taking more from you. At first, no one noticed anything. The coins looked the same emperor's face, same shine. But beneath the surface, everything was rotting. Each new coin was a little lighter, a little thinner, a little more copper than silver. And slowly, the truth became impossible to ignore. Prices exploded. Merchants demanded more coins for the same goods. Trust evaporated. Trade collapsed back into barter and raw gold. Rome hadn't raised taxes. Rome had simply corrupted the money, and every citizen paid the price. A hidden tax, imposed without a vote, a law, or even a warning. Rome fell, but the trick lived on. Jump forward to revolutionary France, 1790s. The government was broke, desperate, out of options. So it printed paper money called assignats, supposedly backed by seized church land. At first, it felt like progress. Modern, efficient, civilized. Then the printing presses sped up, and up, and up. The notes collapsed. Bread riots erupted in Paris. Farmers refused paper entirely. Families watched their savings evaporate again. The government didn't raise taxes. It just inflated the money supply, stealing quietly from everyone holding paper. And then came the most infamous case of all. Weimar Germany. After World War I, drowning in reparations and debt, the Reichsbank printed money relentlessly. By 1923, workers demanded wages twice a day because their pay lost value by the hour. Housewives sprinted to markets before prices doubled by sunset. Children built forts out of worthless banknotes. A loaf of bread cost billions. A lifetime of savings annihilated. The hidden tax had turned into outright confiscation. And here's the darkest part. Governments around the world didn't look at Weimar and think, this is dangerous. They looked at it and realized, this is powerful. Because inflation is the most convenient tax on earth. Borrow, spend, print, and repay tomorrow with devalued money. Creditors get crushed, savers get robbed, but the government escapes untouched. And ordinary people don't riot, not the way they riot against explicit taxes, because the theft is invisible. You never receive a bill for inflation. You just wake up one day and your paycheck buys less. Your groceries cost more. Your rent quietly climbs. That's the design. Britain mastered this game during both world wars. The Bank of England printed, prices crept upward, and citizens unknowingly financed a global empire. Victory was celebrated, but the silent losers were the savers whose pounds bought less every year. Inflation, patriotic theft disguised as sacrifice. And the 20th century repeated the pattern again and again. In the United States after World War II, inflation quietly dissolved wartime debt. Politicians called it growth, but it was simply the hidden tax at work, draining value from every hardworking American while the government's balance sheet magically healed itself. Politicians called it growth, but a large part of the so-called recovery wasn't productivity at all. It was simply the silent vaporization of wartime debt as rising prices quietly erased the government's obligations. Then came 1971. When President Richard Nixon severed the dollar's link to gold, the last restraint on monetary power snapped. Overnight, the dollar lost its anchor, and governments gained unlimited permission to inflate. From that moment on, the world lived under pure fiat, money backed by nothing but political will, and inflation became the quiet default of modern life. Think about your own life. You deposit money in a savings account earning 1% interest. Inflation is running at 5%. You aren't saving. You're bleeding 4% of your wealth every year, and that lost value doesn't vanish. It flows silently, automatically, to borrowers whose debts shrink, to governments whose deficits become easier to finance, and to asset holders whose real estate, stocks, and commodities rise while your cash evaporates. Inflation is not economics. It is redistribution dressed as policy, a transfer of wealth from the many who hold money to the few who hold assets. The 1970s made this impossible to ignore. Inflation exploded into double digits. Families watched their savings melt. Mortgage rates shot to 15%, then 18%. Workers demanded wage hikes just to avoid falling backward every month. The hidden tax was no longer hidden. It was a national crisis, and the only way out was pain. Federal Reserve Chairman Paul Volcker slammed interest rates to nearly 20%. A deliberate, engineered recession designed to choke inflation to death. It worked, but at a brutal cost. Businesses collapsed. Millions lost jobs. Homes were repossessed. Entire regions plunged into economic despair. The cure nearly killed the patient, and yet, the lesson remained. Inflation is always paid by ordinary people. Governments love it because it's a stealth weapon, but they fear it because once the public feels it, truly feels it, the anger becomes impossible to control. That is why they massage the numbers, redefine CPI, adjust the basket, change the formulas. Ask yourself, if your grocery bill doubles in 10 years, but official inflation is only 2%, who benefits from the lie? The most revealing modern example arrived in 2008. The financial system collapsed, banks imploded under their own greed, and governments rescued them by printing trillions. They called it quantitative easing. Wall Street called it salvation. Ordinary savers called it what it truly was: theft. Inflation didn't show up in milk and eggs, not immediately. It showed up in assets. Homes doubled, stocks tripled, luxury goods soared, wages stagnated, the wealth gap detonated. The hidden tax had evolved, but the trick was the same: devalue money, punish savers, reward the leveraged and the elite. Then came 2020, a pandemic, a lockdown, an economic freeze, and governments responded the only way they know how: by printing money on a scale humanity had never seen. Stimulus checks, corporate bailouts, rescues for everyone except the people who actually needed rescuing. All of it funded by digital money created out of nothing. For a brief moment, it felt like alchemy. Free money, frozen debts, a world where governments could print prosperity out of thin air. But magic always sends the bill. By 2021, 2022, inflation came back like a wildfire. Energy bills doubled. Food prices exploded. Housing costs spiked into the stratosphere. And once again, the winners were the people who owned assets, property, stocks, commodities. The losers were the middle class and the poor, the people who lived on cash and wages. Inflation was the tax nobody voted for, and everybody paid. And this pattern isn't American, it's universal. In Argentina, decades of overspending turned inflation into a survival skill. Families sprint to spend pesos before they evaporate. Entire generations grow up knowing one truth: their own money cannot be trusted. In Zimbabwe, the 2000s became a global symbol of monetary collapse. Trillion-dollar banknotes that couldn't buy bread, savings burned to ash, a modern nation shoved back into barter. In Lebanon, between 2019 and 2021, banks simply froze withdrawals. The currency collapsed by 90%. Doctors, engineers, retirees, the entire middle class watched their life savings disappear in real time. Different countries, different leaders, same mechanism, same theft. Economists sometimes try to rebrand it as good inflation. They'll tell you 2% inflation is healthy. It keeps spending high and economies dynamic. But here's what they don't say: even good inflation melts your savings. Even healthy inflation is still a hidden tax. The only difference is speed. So how do you protect yourself? History is blunt. In Rome, survivors weren't the ones holding debased coins. They were the ones holding real silver and gold. In Weimar Germany, those with foreign currency or land endured, while savers were annihilated. In the 1970s, wealth flowed to people holding hard assets, real estate, commodities, while cash turned to dust. In Lebanon, the only survivors were those who had dollars hidden abroad. Everyone else, trapped inside the system, lost everything. The pattern is always the same. Inflation punishes the trusting, it punishes the passive, it punishes savers. But it rewards the prepared, the liquid, the mobile, the people who hold real assets instead of promises. And governments will keep using inflation, because the alternative, admitting they're raising taxes, is politically impossible. No politician will ever stand at a podium and say, "We're taking more of your paycheck." It's much easier to let inflation do the job quietly. So they tell you it's temporary. They tell you it's under control. They change how inflation is calculated. They bury the truth under jargon, quantitative easing, modern monetary theory, phrases designed to make theft sound like science. But the reality never changes. Inflation is a tax, the oldest, easiest, and most unfair tax in human history. So the next time your rent jumps, the next time groceries cost more, the next time your paycheck feels smaller, remember, it isn't an accident. It isn't a mystery. It's policy. And you're the one paying for it. If this shifted how you see inflation, hit subscribe. The answers aren't hidden in the future. They're written in the past.